those on the sides, please sit down. We are starting the session. There are actually two changes in the schedule. Only one was intimated to you by the welcome speaker. There will not be a full-scale presentation from my side because of certain constraints of time. I'm going to only mention a few broad points in lieu of a presentation, and I will leave the stage for the more esteemed speakers that we have to say, to sort of give their presentations. The key question that we are dealing with today is the role of science and technology in agriculture. And given that this is a conference happening in India, there is a certain Indian tinge to the discussions as well. The first point that I wanted to make in lieu of an introduction to this session is that the relationship between science and agriculture is generally considered a very complex one, and of course very contentious and controversial as well. There are multiple dimensions from which this debate has been looked at. There are multiple dimensions from which this debate has been dealt with or engaged with in the literature. And if you broadly look at some of the relationships that we speak about, there are multiple levels at which this debate has been undertaken. To begin with itself, there are differences of opinion about how agriculture has to be viewed as a system. Is it a system of production, or is it something that is to be considered as nature, as part of nature itself? That constitutes a very important divide in the way discussions on agriculture and environment, for instance, are held. And hardly are sometimes discussions held in the sense of a dialectical relationship between man and nature, but in the sense of nature being an exquisite, essentialist category in itself. So that's one set of debates that you will have out there, and not sort of looking at production as a very important part of the debate. There are also differences of opinion and debates on what would be a philosophy of agricultural science as opposed to a philosophy of science in general. And here you will see a lot of debates with respect to Malthusianism, the emergence of new forms of Malthusianism, what people call as neo-Malthusianism and so on. How should the question of environmental justice be addressed in the context of agricultural production? Now, there we have a number of pointers to a certain philosophy of agricultural science in the literature, but we still do not have a full-fledged, well-written philosophy of agricultural science as yet, which would be distinct from philosophy of science in the first place, while there are major overlaps between the two. With the emergence of GMOs and coming of gene editing and so on, this discussion has further progressed as to how exactly should we locate the philosophy of agricultural science, given this vast and massive advances that are taking place in agricultural science. The discussion between agriculture and environment is also very contentious because of the very history of emergence of agriculture in alignment with the way European capitalism developed. For example, the emergence of agrarian capitalism, which progressed hand in hand in some sense with the progress of science from the time of Liebig and so on, you will see that the enclosure movement, the different kinds of dislocations that happened as part of agrarian capitalism, and the agricultural development and growth of productivity that happened alongside have been conflated a lot in debates. And this distinction between what science and its growth is on the one side, and how the economy, as in a capitalist society, has advanced historically, that conflation has also created enormous amount of acrimony in the way the debates are held. There is also the question of politics of agriculture, green revolution in particular, where there have been confusions across whether it is a green revolution or a red revolution, the linkages of agriculture, a green revolution with American foreign policy. Some see it as a handmaiden of imperialism, others see it as a very autonomous process of growth that happened in the domestic politics of countries like India. So that is another debate that you will have out there. Finally, the challenge of climate change. Professor Jayaraman is here, he'll speak more about it, but the coming of climate change has further intensified some of these debates as to what must be the role of science in achieving a certain net zero target that we will have in the future, or the use of science itself as a tool to reach that particular target. So this, I'll skip some of this and I'll go directly to a point that I wanted to make as a second point, which is the whole relationship that we have between green revolution and the overall question of environment in countries like India. I'll make a very limited point in this, in the limited time that I have, which is that much of the discussion in the last 2 or 3 years has been consumed by this particular graph, which is put out by Glenn Stone in an article that he wrote in different places. It appears in different places. The key point that Glenn Stone makes in this graph is that green revolution did not lead to any increased growth rate of agricultural production in developed countries. Because the line has been quite straight out there and there is no structural break that you would see. And this essentially means that green revolution was a failure in countries like India. That's essentially the point. There are sub-points which are related to the growth of fertilizer consumption that you will see as a line going up and so on. But this graph is essentially missing the central point about green revolution. What is the central point about green revolution? There is a statistical question there. Sandeepan, Deepak Johnson, others have written a paper on it, which is there in the Economic and Political Weekly last year. But more than statistics, there's a larger point that is missed in this discussion, which is, in my view, this graph. This is the correct graph, in my view. What did green revolution do? Green revolution made it possible to produce more without cutting down one additional tree from the forests of India. Right? You can see the blue line, which is essentially flat from the 1960s onwards, which means that very little, almost zero increase in area has been there in the cultivation of food grains, but you've had a growth of production and productivity which has progressed at a much rapid rate than before. This is the correct graph to draw, in my view, not the earlier graph. In other words, green revolution must be seen as enormously carbon saving in some sense, because in the 10,000 years after Neolithic revolution, you will see that enormous amount of forest, fragile lands were cut down in order to make way for more area to be cultivated. That was not the case with green revolution. So rather than getting lost in whether there was a statistical difference in growth rates between before or after green revolution, the debate, in my view, should focus on this, this very important shift that has taken place. This is a small graph, and I'll close with this graph, which is, this graph essentially shows if that green bar that you see, which is essentially unchanged, is the actual area cultivated with food grains in India. Now, if there was no yield growth that happened post-1960s in India, how much more area would have been required to produce what you're producing today? That is a question that we ask. To produce the close to 300 million tons of food grains that we produce today, we use about 127 million hectares, and that's largely the area that we used in 1960s also. Right? Now, given this, if the yield growth had not taken place, how much more area would have been required to be cultivated in order to produce what we are producing today in terms of food grains? If zero growth rate had taken place, you would have required close to 461 million hectares of area to be cut down from somewhere or redirected from somewhere to the growth of food grain production. In India, most likely it would have been forests or very fragile lands. Now, even if I assume that in the absence of green revolution, there was a 1.4% growth rate of yields on an annual basis, you will still have had to cut close to 100 million hectares of forest lands in order to make way for new land in order to produce what we produce today. So if India is food self-sufficient today, it is largely also through a path which did not require new land to be taken up for cultivation. This is also the way that you will have to adopt if you want to make way for new crops like millets, for example. There's a lot of discussion around millets these days, but if you want to make way for millets, you must release land from somewhere. And that land has to come from crops like rice and wheat, and that release must be or has to be founded on a higher productivity of those crops. And that is where the debate on green revolution must be located, in my view. I will just make these 2 points. If there is time, I'll continue in my final remarks, but this is time to actually invite the first speaker. I'm very happy to invite Professor Adenle to make his presentation. Sir, 20 minutes? You have this mic. Can I use this? Of course you can. Is it on? I think so. We'll check. Is mic on? It's on.
Who has media?
No, it's coming. It's coming.
First of all, let me thank you, Swaminathan Research Foundation and the World Academy of Sciences for selecting me as the inaugural recipient of TWAS and Swaminathan, MS Swaminathan Award for Food and Peace. And a big thank to Prime Minister Narendra Modi for presenting the award to me in New Delhi, August this year. And I thank Foundation for Agrarian Study for inviting me to attend this conference. Please, I may shoot over 20 minutes by just 3 minutes. So let me move on to my next slide. I'm going to be focusing on cereal here. Cereal in Africa are most important staple crop, particularly for household food security. This graph illustrates the trend of cereal yield and fertilizer use, region by region in Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa has an average of 25 kilograms per hectare for fertilizer use, compared to that of global average of 134 kilograms per hectare. So there is a yield gap of about 61% lower than that of a global average. Here, the sub-Saharan African average yield for cereal is 1.5 ton per hectare, compared to global average of 4.1 ton per hectare. So we have a yield gap of about roughly 83% less than global average. So a wide gap is a critical driver of low crop productivity in Africa. So then again, we have a small order yield gap and food import dependency. The persistent small order yield gap and food import dependency in Africa continue to shape African food system, which limit the productivity and weaken the food system. As you can see here, the typical small order yield gap for sub-Saharan Africa is between 60 to 80% for maize, compared to Asia, which is 30 to 40% for rice and wheat, Latin America, which is 20 to 30% soybean, and global average of 35 to 40%. As a result of that, Africa import 20% of total food, compared to a global average of just 7%, right? So we are having challenges here, particularly with regards to food system. And we need to strengthen food system in order to be able to achieve food security. Right. I'm quickly going to run through this. In a couple of months ago, we had a conference on small order and finance. So the theme of that conference is small order finance able? Right. Over 70% or 70% of small orders still need financing. And we can only reach less than 10%. So in Nigeria, we have demonstrated successful business model. And the name of that agri enterprise is called Babanguna. So what Babanguna does is bringing smallholders together under cluster system or cooperative system, right? And then what they do is provide training and they provide access to credit. And there has been some sort of myth about smallholder doesn't have the collateral, they are too poor to access funds, etc., etc. But we have proven that more than 99% of repayment was made by the smallholder who are able to access credit through Babanguna. Then again, is public de-risking impact? I mean, is there any impact for public de-risking in Nigeria? Let me give one example here. We have NISA. NISA is Nigerian-based incentive risk sharing for agricultural lending. So you offer about 75% of coverage as part of coverage. 75% as part of coverage for of blended finance and de-risking agricultural lending. So that is working to some degree. Then we have Anchor Bora program, where farmers actually borrow money. But unfortunately, unfortunately, about almost $1 trillion were unable to be recovered simply because of lack of farm database. And moreover, we have ghost farmers within the system that are collecting loan and they could not repay the loan back. Then we have extension gap and losses. So we have post-harvest losses, which cost about 3.5 trillion naira annually. That is equivalent to about $2.2 billion every year. Right. One thing I would like you to understand here is agronomic knowledge is a critical factor in improving yield. And the role of extension services is indispensable in strengthening our food system. This graph illustrates the extension gap and yield comparison, using Nigeria as an example of, as a representative of Africa example, alongside Asia and Latin America. FAO recommend one extension officer per 1,000 farmer. The result of yield is 4 tons per hectare. But in Nigeria, we have one extension officer per 10,000 farmer. What do we get from that? 1.2 tons per hectare. In Asia, it's 1.5, one extension officer is per 1,500 farmer. And you see the yield is 4.5. In Latin America, it's 4.2 tons. So we are still having a lot of problem with regards to yield in Africa. That means we need to improve on our extension services. So the question here is, how do we address some of the food system challenges that are associated with low productivity? Of course, we have the innovation in modern biotechnology, innovation in renewable energy, innovation in digital agriculture has begun to rewrite the narrative in Africa. So let me quickly run through this one. This is a percentage of estimated farmer with access to digital advisory services in Africa. And obviously, in terms of digital advisory access, the proportion of farmers using mobile, online, or ICT-based agricultural information services still remain uneven across Africa. You can see North Africa is doing well, and then East Africa is also doing well, including South Africa. So let me move to the next slide. Kenya is emerging as a continental leader simply because of Kenya's strong digital innovation ecosystem, which has enabled over 60% of farmers to benefit from mobile and online services. But of course, there is some sort of difference among other countries in Africa, Ethiopia and Egypt, they are doing well, but not as good as Kenya and Ghana. So the one thing I would like to point out about Kenya is the M-Pesa program, which obviously has about 35 million active users, is already using digital payment platform from M-Pesa. And Digi Farm and Haikal, is engaging approximately 1.6 million farmers in Kenya just to access input, credit, etc., etc. And Trigger, High Procure, and Farm Drive, they are beginning to emerge as well. And let me move on to the next slide. I published this paper in 2020. So, and one of the things I want to emphasize in this paper is solar energy has a role to play in food system, particularly in production, post-harvest management, supply chain, etc., etc. But the question is, how can solar energy affect productivity, food security, and income in view of weak financial infrastructure, limited credit, and upfront capital in Africa? So access to finance is critical to implementation of solar projects. So this figure shows the Global Environment Facility Fund. You can see that over the past 10 years or 20 years now, North Africa has been able to access $120 million from GEF. The reason is simply because of the fact that obviously there is strong relative institutional capacity infrastructure to be, and of course the expertise is there, because those are the criteria that been set by the donors if you are going to be able to access a fund for implementation of solar project. Now, this is work I'm known for in Africa, and I'm glad that I've done some justice there. It's very, very complex. So, GMO has potential role in strengthening food system as well, because you can create, GM product that is resistant to pests and diseases, drought tolerant, of course, even biofortified to improve the nutritional content of staple food products. But there is controversy around the application or adoption of GMO in Africa. So between 2011 and 2013, I went to about 6 or 8 African countries to speak to over 300 stakeholders about the application of GMO improving food security. There on the left, I was in Tunisia talking to the scientists who are working on wheat. Then in Kenya, I was talking to policymakers about their perspective on adoption of GMO. And the banana farmer, I think that was in Uganda, I was asking them about their perspective about the use of GMO. And I was actually monitoring or following up on the confined feed fryer. It's called GM Super Cassava in my own country, right? And then there has been, of course, campaign against me or people say, oh, I'm promoting GMO for, Monsanto and, all this multinational. So let me quickly move forward with this one. So in Africa, there is a need for biosafety, functional biosafety framework to adopt GMO. And as you can see in this African map, and the star one shows countries that have commercialized GMO, while the green one shows confined feed fryer with functional biosafety framework. The light green one shows the confined feed fryer with interim legislation. That means maybe when it's interim, the stakeholders or the policymaker have not approved the biosafety framework. When the orange one shows biosafety law without confined feed fryer, that means probably the president has not approved the biosafety law despite putting it together. And where the gray one shows no biosafety and no confined feed fryer. So let me quickly point out here. These are the leading countries that are going GMO in Africa, right? South Africa remains the leading country. It has been growing GMO for the past almost 30 years. And the one with the star shows is either they have grown GMO previously and they've stopped growing it due to the public's concern that is associated with the use of GMO. And for example, Egypt used to grow GMO, Burkina Faso used to grow GMO, they've stopped growing GMO because of public concern, or probably lack of risk assessment to grow GMO. So let me quickly move to the next slide, which is very important. So at the end of my, my visit across Africa, so I developed, with my team, I developed F3 framework, which is fiber, food, and feed. The whole idea of fiber is to grow GM cotton, which is a critical material in textile industry. Then GM food for livestock, while undergoing all the necessary risk assessment, to regulate GMO and before human consumption. So the majority of stakeholders agree on, emphasize on risk analysis of GMO, which include risk assessment, risk management, and at the head of this research, so more than 10 countries are now commercializing GMO using this model to adopt GMO. And more than 30 countries across Africa are conducting confined feed trial on GMO. So this is my last slide. I think it's important to foster policy coherence and governance at regional level. I still see problem at the regional level in Africa. There is a huge disconnect, particularly between all those four ministries: Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Trade, and Ministry of Environment. So creating high-level coordination council, linking Ministry of Agriculture and Finance and Trade is obviously very important in strengthening food system in Africa. And one thing I would like to emphasize here is investment in research and development program is very, very important. Let me give an example of what is happening with regards to adoption of GMO. United States adopts science-based innovation, right, to adopt GMO for competitiveness, productivity, and food security, whereas Europe apply precautionary principle, which has prevented many African countries or many developing countries from the uptake of GMO due to their relationship with Europe. So here, it is very important to engage local scientists, in incorporating local cultivar when it comes to developing GMO. And I'm sure you have experienced this in India, where local cultivar is very important when you are developing GMO products. So finally, it is important to invest in digital agriculture and the intelligence system that will help create access to regional market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Adenle. I now invite Professor Kathleen Hefferon for the presentation. You would speak here. You can see the screen here, so face the audience.
All right. Teaching a lot of students microbiology. That's what I do. But by night, or when I'm not teaching, can you switch? Next slide. Oh, can I do it?
You can use this, yeah.
Okay. I started a company. This company was called Forte Protein, and it's a molecular farming company. Grew and grew, and then it split into two. So it's now called P-Cell Bio, actually. And we're having a lot of fun with this company. I'm going to talk about some technologies that are being developed by us and by other small companies in the States that are, I think you'll find interesting and disruptive all at the same time.
You can see here.
Oh, okay. Sorry, yeah.
You can face the audience and you can see the screen.
Here we go. Okay. So for today's presentation, I'm going to start by talking about what it's like to be an agricultural researcher in the States right now. The bioeconomy is a national security issue. And then I'm going to talk about the world's need for non-animal source protein a little bit. And then I'll talk about molecular farming and plant cellular agriculture. So certainly in the States, it seems that the US has been a global leader for biotechnology, but now we're having all kinds of concerns of falling behind China. And this is a major issue that we're hearing about again and again. Anyone who's in the entrepreneurial world, or certainly anyone in academics, probably hears this all the time. And certainly biotechnology is very important, particularly agricultural biotechnology. I'm showing you here on the right-hand side that we're expecting this market to double in the next 5 or 6 years, so it's an important area. And it's this intersection of AI, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology that's accelerating this impact. So I'm showing you an example that is relevant to me, I suppose, but this is how I would do research in the past, or even today maybe. I'd be working in the lab, on the lab bench. I would be figuring out, let's say, how to make an enzyme that worked better under certain environmental conditions for something I might like to commercialize. And then I'd have to do some scale up, and eventually I'd get things commercialized. It costs millions of dollars and take years to work through. But nowadays, the way things are going, we can actually use AI, computer modeling, and machine learning that's hooked up actually to some kind of robotic system. So the human, someone like me, is right out of the picture, and the model is, using data generated by the robot to sort out what changes would be made to this enzyme to make it work more efficiently. Scale-up is very, very easy, again, based on AI, and then we have commercialization in a matter of days or maybe months. So to make what would take me by hand 6 months to a year will be done in 4 days to a week at this point. And it just costs thousands of dollars. So things are really, really moving very quickly. But at the same time, of course, we have the usual problems that you all are very familiar about. Certainly food insecurity. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. We have a huge cost to our global food system. There's a lot of hidden costs, certainly in terms of health effects and also environmental problems. We have, of course, still a lot of very poor people who are employed in agriculture, and still some of these are children. In fact, 70% of child labor is involved in agriculture. So certainly if we can find ways to transform our food system, we could lift many people out of poverty and make the world a better place. But still more problems. We have zoonotic diseases and climate change, and of course this can be related to encroaching on wild spaces and how we are running our agricultural land today. And of course we're actually running out of arable land, so here I'm using palm oil as a very easy example for everyone, where the destruction and deterioration of land is very obvious. And then even something, as traumatic as it is for me to think about coffee, it has a very uncertain future. We have all kinds of problems, fair trade issues, exploitation of laborers. We have sustainability issues. We have very, very few cultivars or varieties of coffee, so we're very limited in our germplasm and what we have in terms of variability. And of course we have problems with our carbon footprint. On the left here we're looking at methane emissions, and agriculture is the line right there at the top. And on the right-hand side we're looking at nitrous oxide emissions, so this is fertilizer basically, and again agriculture is way up there. Of course, we've been genetically engineering our foods forever, it seems. Even before we were working on the lab bench, we would be without knowing the genomes of plants and things like this, we would still be using classical and traditional plant breeding to come up with what was a natural watermelon of thousands of years ago to the watermelon we know today. And the same thing, of course, with corn and teosinte. This is something that we're very familiar with. But these days we talk about, in generic terms, something known as cellular agriculture. This is where we're using more of a synthetic biology approach to produce different products, including foods. So if looking at here, we can see, 1973, we were making recombinant bacterial DNA. This is probably around the time we're producing insulin for the first time using synthetic biology. Then if you go down and look at 2013, we made our first lab-grown hamburger. So that's a cell-based meat. And then down to 2020, you can see that this is Perfect Day, actually made ice cream, and every single component was made in a microbial fermenter, so there's no animal involved at all. So there's certainly a need for non-animal source protein. How can we get away from possibly using livestock in agriculture, or maybe less so? And certainly this is something that in the global north is thought about a lot. And the figure I'm showing you here on the right-hand side, you can see at the top we have a cow. A cow is a fermenter. There's a big rumen full of microbes. They're digesting pieces of hay or grass and forage and making different types of proteins. Then on the bottom we have what we call precision fermentation. So this is where we take a microbe and we assert a particular gene of interest. It could be myoglobin to make a meat protein, or could be casein to make cheese or some kind of milk protein. And then we use these large fermenters and grow the microbes and then extract our protein. So these kind of alternative proteins could outperform conventional meat once we get them up and scaled and running. And this table just shows you how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we can reduce land use and air pollution using these different forms of non-animal source protein. Just also to mention as well, we have this interesting geopolitical change for agriculture. So here I'm showing you, it's actually a molecular farming company in Iceland called Orf Genetics. And it's a little greenhouse and it's run on geothermal fuel. And so it doesn't require any external energy. It's using what's available on this volcanic island. And it means that places that you don't think as being, major agricultural producers could very well become so because they have this link with energy. So even a place like Saudi Arabia could possibly become a big food producer in the future. So for alternative proteins, I have this little diagram of the landscape. If you look at the bottom left corner, you're looking at something like an Impossible Burger or these sort of cell-based, plant-based versions of animal protein that are processed. On the right, the top left, we're looking at cultivated meat, and I mentioned that before. So just growing, in cell culture, growing lots and lots of seafood, let's say, or hamburger or whatever. On the bottom right, we have precision fermentation, which I mentioned, using microbes to produce different animal proteins. And then we have on the top right, we have molecular farming, which we call the fourth pillar, and this is using plants to do the same sort of thing. So this is an example here. We have milk being produced by cows on the left, and then we have different types of processed proteins, such as soy milk. And then next we have completely made by microbes milk that tastes just the same and has the same nutritional content. And then we have plants doing the same thing, doing the jobs as microbes as a bioreactor. So molecular farming could have great environmental and social impact, certainly reducing land use, water use, energy demand, and it could be integrated into the current workforce. So I think it has a lot of good prospects. This is an example here of a molecular farming company that's in the States. They're using a transgenic approach. They make transgenic soybean, and it's expressing myoglobin. So myoglobin is a meat protein. It carries heme, so it has iron. It's pink. It gives blood its pink color, I guess. And you can see here that the transgenic version is pink. And so that can be used and is being so right now. This is how it's made. It just gives you the idea. So traditional livestock production, we have to grow crops to feed the livestock, and then we produce food from the livestock. On the bottom with molecular farming, we just take the gene from the livestock. Often it's on a database. You don't have to touch an animal at all. Put that gene into the seeds, grow the crops, and you end up with the same thing, but you never had to touch an animal. So for this company that we've started, we're doing looking at a number of different technologies. In this example, I'm showing you again, this is cocoa, I think, and the price of cocoa over the last few years. So you can see that it's getting out of control, and there's lots of problems with having enough cocoa in the future. So we have sustainability issues, and we have crop failures, of course, and we have, of course, Donald Trump and his import tariffs. So it's making the world very unstable, I think, in many ways. So we can use, thank you, we can use these technologies to use AI together with biotechnology to produce a better food, more resilient supply chain for food. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. And this just gives you an idea. We can replace resource-intense farming for rare plants, something like saffron, which really you can only get a few places in the world, and certainly there are a lot of issues for sustainability and transparency. And we could produce that, for example, in cell culture. It's easy enough to do. We can actually metabolically engineer crops that are easy for us to grow right now, but they can produce different products, such as crocin from saffron. And we can do this so that we have this more circular and resilient supply chain. This is kind of a messy slide showing everything at once, but to make it a little bit more simplistic, I've kind of split it into some more pieces here. So this is a process of molecular farming. This is a non-transgenic approach that we can use. And in this figure, we're looking at using, actually it's a virus expression system. So we've modified a plant virus in such a way that it will produce the protein but not make the plant sick. We can inoculate the virus on the plant, and over a few days we get really high production of our protein of interest. And then we can actually purify the protein from the plant. It all takes within just a few days. We get lots and lots of our protein being made. It's not considered by the FDA to be a GMO. So we can do this and not have to go through that regulatory process. And this is more futuristic, but we can also use these viral systems and something like a drone technology to inoculate a field, for example, and within days produce a protein of interest. So this is a little bit futuristic, but not that far in the future. And folks are starting to do this to change phenotypes of crops quickly in case there's something like a drought or something comes along and farmers need to make some changes. So this is a technology that will be, I think, pretty robust in a few years. We can produce something like lactoferrin. Lactoferrin comes from dairy, and it's only in about 1% of cow milk. It's a very, very expensive to get. It's a really good one for immune function, and it's an antimicrobial. This company on the right is a precision fermentation company called Turtle Tree. The lactoferrin costs about $750, $1,000 a kilogram. It's quite expensive because it's in such low abundance in milk. But we can produce it in soy, for example. We calculated for about $6.50. We could make it. So all of a sudden, it becomes quite feasible. The Turtle Tree group make it for about the same price as the real, the cow milk. So it's about $1,000 a kilogram. So I think crops are the way to go. We could really do some good. This is just another example of a technology that you might find disruptive, but it's interesting as well. This is making tea. So on the top here, we're showing you how folks make tea. We're going to have problems with tea, just like we are having with cocoa and coffee and things like this. Tea is the next one that we're going to start to have some climate change related issues with. And you can see here on the bottom that we can make T-cell cultures. We can use CRISPR to genome edit these T cells in such a way that we can produce new flavors and with new bioactive compounds, so we can make brand new teas that have lots of health benefits. And we can do this all in tissue culture. So we're not using any more arable land. So that's most of what I have to tell you, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Hefferon, for that very interesting presentation. I now invite a very great friend of the Foundation for Agrarian Studies, Dr. K.C. Bansal, to speak. He's, for those of you who have come on FAS programs, you'll see him as a regular in all our science-based interfaces. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah. Good morning, friends, and I must thank Dr. V.K. Ramachandran and Professor Dr. Madhura Swaminathan, and friends from the Foundation of Agrarian Studies for this opportunity. And what I'm going to talk to you about in about next 20 minutes, I think transgenic CRISPR technology in agriculture. I'm going to give you an overview, kind of status and the progress India is making with regard to these two technologies, and particularly highlighting the work, in fact, with which I have been associated with. You know, again, back to Green Revolution, and I'm very thankful to Professor Ramakumar that he highlighted it, and that's what I'm going to talk to about it, but with respective to use of conventional plant breeding, how important that remains even today, you know, and that was in 60s when Green Revolution took birth. That was a result of the, you know, these conventional plant breeding wherein, you know, wheat with wheat is hybridized and you develop the semi-dwarf high-yielding wheat varieties. But again, now I'm going to just compare, you know, the kind of approaches available for genetic improvement of crops. I talked to you about conventional plant breeding. And conventional plant breeding, then I'm going to talk to you about genetic engineering and, of course, genome editing. But just to highlight for the students' perspective as well, that what is the differences between these two. Just before that, when I go to the slide, I would just like to make a point clear, you know, that our goal is to improve genetically the crop plants for increasing more production in various ways. And you have to do changes at the level of DNA. Conventional plant breeding, we did not know much about DNA, what changes are being made within the plant species. So we were only looking at the phenotype. But now, since we have advanced so much that we know what changes are taking place at the level of DNA or the level of gene, and what genes are involved, we can directly now play around with genes. You know, and genes, not only the genes available in that particular plant species, we are trying to improve upon genes available in the wider gene pool across we have in different organisms. So conventional plant breeding primarily relied on the genes available on one particular plant species we want to improve. For example, you cross only wheat with wheat or rice with rice. So, and it is, of course, you know, it takes a lot of time. And there are other technical issues. I don't want to go into details of that. Next, genetic engineering, wherein you take specific genes from all other related or unrelated organisms. You find those genes are useful. Now you know about those genes and you know the method to transfer them. You can very well do that. And that's what the whole world has been doing, it really speaking, for the last about 25, 30 years. Now we come to genome editing. You don't have to rely upon, again, all the time, of course, you know, on the genes which are unrelated from different organisms. The native genes by themselves are actually speaking corrected or made certain changes which were required because we have made so much of advancement that we know about all that. So then in India, when we talk about it, of course, there are several crops. There are about 24 crops here listed with different crops and traits which we want to address through the route of GM. And we have a stringent, robust, internationally sound biosafety regulatory program in India. I don't want to go again into the details, time will not permit me, but just to briefly tell you that we have these different stages of regulatory approaches. For example, we start with event selection trial, then we go to biosafety research level trial 1 and 2, then we go to biosafety research level trial 2, and then environmental release, and finally the commercial release that is being, you know, done by the Ministry of Agriculture. And we have all these bodies like Institute Biosafety Committee, Review Committee on Genetic Manipulation of Government of India, then Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee again of Government of India. Until then, we have got environmental release by them, then we go to ICR, Ministry of Agriculture, and we have got a varietal release. So just to give an account of the last about 10 years or so, you know, for example, in 2015, you know, we conducted GM event trials of about 18 crops listed here. And the ones which are in the board, we have made some progress. I will talk to you about it as I go further. And then now in 2024, the whole world, if you look around into about 29 to 30 countries, about 206 million hectares is under GM crops currently. These are some of the countries highlighted here: USA, Brazil, Argentina, Canada. India, number 5, with 11 million hectares with a single crop, and that is BT cotton. And you know, commercialization of BT cotton in India took place in sometimes 2002. Since then, you can see the area under BT cultivation has been increasing tremendously. Today, about 95% of the farmers have adopted it, and there's an increase in production, as you can see very well in this graph, from 14 to 15 million bales. When we introduced BT cotton in 2002 and 3, we reached up to almost 40 million bales by 2015-16. In just more than a decade, we achieved a target of achieving from 14 to 40 million bales of cotton production. You know, which is, of course, then it started coming down. Currently, it's about 30 million bales. But of course, there are issues, we can talk about it. Science has to progress more to tackle those issues, which continuously keep emerging with this, you know, era of climate change. But nevertheless, this also you must kindly note that the use of, or the investment, I should call it, on use of pesticide has reduced drastically. Cost of cultivation has cut down drastically, particularly when you talk of use of pesticide, whereas the labor requirement is even much more. Therefore, we need even herbicide tolerant or picking of the balls, you know, which happens to be done here manually. So after BT cotton, we have had an opportunity of getting environmental release permit of GM mustard, which is a hybrid technology, as well as one of the hybrids using this particular technology, a GM mustard hybrid, DMH11, shown here in this table. On the lower panel, you can just see DMH11, which is contributing to about 28% more yield than its parental line, and also, you know, against a national or a zonal check, it is contributing to 30% higher productivity. Per kilograms per hectare, productivity I'm talking about it, either 28% higher than the parent variety, one of the female parents which has been used in developing these hybrids through GM technology, or even 30% higher productivity. But again, this somehow, unfortunately, is not going forward. It is under legal review. So we had a press conference soon after that, because after 20 years, this was the next crop which was, you know, environmentally allowed or for commercial cultivation. And the message here was that, again, these two different organizations like National Academy of Agricultural Sciences or the Trust for Advancement of Agricultural Sciences, together we had a press conference. Our message was so clear that the decision by the Government of India is highly progressive, and it's a step forward towards, we call it self-reliant India, Atmanirbhar Bharat. And of course, this will allow us to produce more, you know, GM hybrids of mustard with better oil quality, better oil content, resistance to disease and climate change, etc., you know, which are very important. We must try to, you know, use this technology, you know, to move forward. So currently, 2025, this is the status here, that we have got BT cotton is the only crop legally which is, you know, allowed for cultivation. BT brinjal, there is a moratorium which continues to be so, unfortunately. GM mustard is again under legal review. Then we have some of these crops listed here, which are at different stages of regulatory approval. You know, as I said before, whether event selection trial or biosafety research level 1 trial, biosafety research level 2 trial. Those approvals are regularly being given by Review Committee on Genetic Manipulation, followed by Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee, as shown here. In one of the crops for matter, I'm just highlighting rubber in Kerala, wherein I had given them the gene about, I think, 20 years ago. Now that, you know, rubber plant is undergoing field trials, I'm very happy about it, by the rubber board, you know, with this particular gene, which is also listed here. And of course, we have got in, you know, October 2025, we had 10th October, there was last meeting where some of these approvals were also given. So that regulatory process is going on, but I say that needs to be enhanced, but there are problems, we can talk about it later. And then, of course, in the meanwhile, you can see GM crops do help farmers to drive benefits. I don't want to go into the details of it, but again, you just see at this particular graph I want to highlight here, you know, these 3 columns on the lower panel shown here, you know, you compare the kind of a benefit to the farmer's profitability. Non-BT variety cotton is about 12,000 rupees. Non-BT hybrid is about 20,000 rupees. And BT cotton hybrid is about 31,000 rupees. So there's a substantial advantage because there's a reduction in the use of pesticides and there's enhanced yield, and even they have a share in international market. So, and we continue, of course, GM technology continues to be crucial for climate resilience. This is the recent article which I had written, and I wanted to highlight that how important it is that delaying the adoption of GM technology could limit India's ability to compete in agricultural trade internationally. And timely release of GM crops is very important, and it will provide immediate advantage and benefit to the Indian farmers. And of course, we have these emerging science technologies. After genetic engineering, which was given a World Food Prize in 2013, you know, and now we have a Nobel Prize winning technology, CRISPR genome editing technology. And these are the two scientists you all know who had done this wonderful piece of work. In just a short span of time, it was discovered in 2012, and 2020 it was given a Nobel Prize. And this technology allows you to remove, add, or alter specific DNA sequences within the native genes of an organism, and therefore you can genetically improve it, or you can provide cancer therapies, curing even inherited disease in human beings. There are already examples of sickle cell disease, for example, a rare disease in a child of about 9 to 12 months old, and then we can use it for genetic improvement of crops. I don't want to go into the details of it here, friends. This is a technical slide, but I just want to show you here that we have these three categories of plants. We have got on the lower panel, you can see here SDN1, where we delete the function of a native gene. Next is SDN2, where you edit, you repair that gene if it is faulty. Number 3 is, of course, just like genetically modified organisms, you insert altogether a new gene. We do the same in gene modification as well, but we don't know where we're inserting that gene. That gene will go and get integrated on a genome of a plant at random. But here we can precisely identify a location where we want to insert a new gene. So that's an advantage. But I will talk to you in my subsequent slides of SDN1 and SDN2, wherein we are only making small native changes. Either we are killing the function of a gene because we want to improve that particular trait, or we are repairing that particular gene. And that's what has been happening naturally, by the way, I must tell you. We have large amount of genetic variation. Now, since scientists have learned it, we are also through genome editing doing what? Plant breeding. But we are doing in a precise manner. We know what we are doing. What result do we expect? In plant breeding, you make so many thousands of crosses, you do not really know how much predictability it will have. Of course, it has given all that kind of success. And fortunately, these methods have been, okay, this is an example I'm just showing you here. If you want to delete the function of a gene. So here, this is the gene as shown in the green bar, here in the middle of the slide. And if you delete some of the function as shown here in the dashes, this gene is providing susceptibility to a particular disease, to tomato, for example, powdery mildew. So if you kill that function of the gene or you delete certain sequences as shown here in the dashed part, which has been done, you see the left on the wild type is a disease, on the right time it is all healthy. So a native, because this is all the advancement of science through functional genomics or genetic engineering and genome editing, we have done it. So in India, I'm just quickly going to talk to you all about India now, where we are with regard to this technology, CRISPR or genome editing. See, this technology is also, the products are regulated, but not as heavily regulated. Scientists thought, because of the science behind it, that you are not bringing any foreign gene. You are only doing certain small changes which are naturally occurring also in genetic variation, which you can also do through conventional plant breeding. But conventional plant breeding, it will take longer time because you have to do the, kind of lot of analysis statistically as well and all. But here, so therefore some of the countries decided that if there is no foreign DNA present in the final product, you don't have to regulate it like GMOs. GMOs are primarily regulated because only we have genes from other sources. Of course, they are now even safe. For the last about 28 years, there's no problem at all with regard to any kind of untoward incident by consumption of genetically modified crops. So in India also, in fact, in 2020, that was 2017, only 4 countries. 2017, 2020, many other countries were added, but that anything shown in green here, those countries, they declared if there's no foreign DNA in the final product, they will not be regulated. But in India, it's still yellow. But we struggled for it, very hard. And thanks to the National Academy of Agricultural Sciences, and we conveyed some kind of a message. We made all the efforts to persuade the government of India. Like few other countries, by the time 12 countries had already given kind of permission of non-GMOs to these plants, genome-edited plants. So we succeeded finally, made a lot of efforts, through videos, etc. I was personally involved into it. And then 2022, March, this decision came. There's exemption of genome-edited, particularly SDN1 and SDN2 crops, from India. So you can see 2022, it was all green. Then we developed a roadmap. We identified crops. For example, mostly, of course, oilseeds, pulses, because we import. We are not self-sufficient yet, as we are in case of wheat and rice. And some of these are the traits which are important. And then we developed standard operating procedures. And while we were doing that, we developed a project. You can see here on 5 to 6 crops, about 700, or $1,000, or 7 crore rupees, not dollars, 7 crore rupees. And we developed this project in crops like rice, mustard, soybean, etc. And then we developed, already launched these 2, genome-edited rice varieties, the first in the world, which have all these advantages as shown here: 19% more yield, 20%, lower greenhouse gas emissions, because we utilize less water, less fertilizers, and therefore you reduce on CO2 emission, etc. And then, of course, this, anyone wants to read more, details are given here. And then this is the global current status. I will start from the lower, on the right lower panel, United States, for example, 2019, high oleic soybean, then GABA tomato in Japan, the non-browning banana, which has been approved, not developed in Philippines, but they've got it, import, for them in Philippines, then mustard greens in USA, and 2 varieties, of course, in India. And then we have got fungal resistant wheat in China, non-browning lettuce in United States, and currently we've got Vexicorn in Japan. So, and then we have also, of course, moved ahead 5 crops with different traits using this GM technology declared as, safe from biosafety point of view. But important is that we still need to work on identifying those native genes, where we want to do SDN1 or SDN2, we want to change their function or delete what they're related with particular phenotype. That information we're still lagging behind quite a bit. Of course, there are other technical issues as well. So here I'm trying to highlight the importance of this technology and how can we utilize the kind of a natural wealth we have in India. We're the 2nd largest gene bank in the world. I'm happy to see Sherry Jacob coming from there. She's involved herself in conservation of these genetic resources. 0.5 million accessions conserved in a single national gene bank. And Government of India has announced, I was talking to Blade about it just now, resources, even water, radiation more efficiently, becomes more sustainable. You don't use more arable land, we increase even more productivity, etc., etc. There's a lot of potential. And we have both resources and technologies available with us. So the take-home message is very clear. I don't want to repeat it, what I already mentioned, that this is a technology to stay here, and we can do really spring wonders with it. But the only important, again, is that we need to have capacity building some of the young researchers. And I have been personally involved with it, with my international friends, with an opportunity to meet her. And this is technology, we're working on it, and I'm sure India will make a lead, and we'll move ahead internationally in this particular era and take care of agriculture. Thank you, friend. Thank you very much.
To ensure that regulatory approvals are smoother for gene editing and that the regulatory approvals are distinct from the convoluted procedures that we have had for GM crops. He, in some sense, has taken enormous amount of personal efforts in ensuring that he gets together people, goes to the government, has advocated, used NAS, of course, but of course through other channels as well, written a lot. And if gene editing has had a certain regulatory looseness that it has in India today, and rightly so, it is thanks to the efforts of people like Dr. Bansal. So thank you, Dr. Bansal. Now I invite Professor Stanford Blade for his presentation.
Pleasure to be here, and thank you to the chair and certainly to the Foundation on Agrarian Studies. Congratulations on pulling together such a remarkable international conference. I bring you greetings on behalf of our Director General, Dr. Himanshu Pathak. As you know, ICRISAT, the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, is based here in India, just outside of Hyderabad in Patancheru. But we also do work across other regions in Asia as well as in Africa, where we have 8 other research campuses, but we work across sub-Saharan Africa as well. As you see, the task that I have before me is to talk about trends in crop science. And the approach that I'm going to take is to predict the future. But if you want to take me seriously, I feel like I have to give you my bona fides if I'm going to predict the future, and if you're going to believe me. I am the son, the grandson, the great-grandson of dairy farmers in Western Canada that produced significant amounts of cereals and oil seeds. I've been a dean at a Canadian university in a faculty at College of Agriculture for 10 years, and I've had the good fortune of working within the CG system, of which ICRISAT is one of the institutes. Indeed, Dr. Madhura Swaminathan is a board member of IRI, the Rice Research Institute, based in Los Baños in the Philippines. You may know of CIMMYT that works on wheat and maize, based in Mexico, and so many other CG centers across the world. Our entire focus, though, of course, is to think about how we bring new technologies to play for those end users, those beneficiaries. And the word there of trends, we're thinking not only of technical things, and I'll speak about that in a moment, but also thinking about the mindset that we are bringing forward as researchers. You see here the approach that ICRISAT has taken, And I'm not talking, or there are no bullets there about machine learning or big data analysis or looking at artificial intelligence. It's the mindset of the way an international research organization has to think about how new technologies, how new innovations are going to be brought forward in the future. And I think in the past, and I will admit this from my standpoint as a person that's been trained in plant breeding, that worked in Africa for almost 10 years, and now working with colleagues both in Asia and Africa, this is not a cheerlead to Viksit Bharat, but across all of the areas in the global south where agriculture can play a very key role. Now, of course, and challenges. Huge numbers of people are living within these regions. You can see the risk that's coming on with respect to hunger. It's over 2 billion people live in these regions. Almost half of the arable land is in dry land regions. So clearly these are the things that we are thinking about as a research center, as we work with national governments, as we work with national programs to make progress. But, and you will hear a paper in a moment about all things climate change, we see that there will also be significant concerns, whether we use the Tokyo models or some of the others that are coming down the pipeline. We understand, and of course, right now in Brazil, the COP30 is being held, and we're starting to again, even though some governments are saying this is not an issue, that clearly climate change is going to have a huge influence in our work around crop development, around the resilience of crops and food security. This will be a key area. I don't know if you can see it, and I'm looking forward to the next paper. India has an interesting future when it comes to climate change. Indeed, there are certain parts of the country where it looks as if there may be a net benefit. And I know no one is advocating for climate change, but it's interesting to look at the models and where India may be in the next 30, 50, 100 years when it comes to climate change. Just clearly from an ICRISAT standpoint, what are we interested in? We're interested in transforming dry land agriculture. That is our ethos. And I should just also make a little bit of a note. ICRISAT has the responsibility, the global mandate to work in particular crops of importance in the dry lands. So you see here the crops that we're working on. These are crops that, of course, are very important in India, but very important across the dryland regions that we work throughout the globe. And even though I've mentioned Asia and Africa, we're involved in the Caribbean in areas where there's dryland agriculture in places like Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and other parts of the world as well, because, of course, drylands cover many parts of the globe. And of course, I just have to have a little bit of a highlight, especially on the millets. You will know that millets here in India have taken on a real life. We had a United Nations Year of Millets in 2023, where the MS Swaminathan Foundation was very much involved, ICAR, the Indian Council on Agricultural Research, and so many other global national partners looking at the potential for millets as just one of those unique crops that has an opportunity to do remarkable things. Right. Let's start talking about the future. So thinking about a program around accelerated crop breeding. What are those new tools, and we've already heard from Professor Bansal of all of the things that are there that we can take advantage of in the next 10 to 20 years. What is this all going to look like? This is a little bit of a repeat because Professor Bansal is the global leader in gene bank work, and I know other colleagues are in the audience as well. ICRISAT, just in our mandate crops, has a gene bank of about 135,000 accessions collected from across the world and all of the productive areas. So what resides in that gene bank? The genes, the traits are there for the next challenges that are coming, whether it's resistance to an insect or resistance to a disease, or maybe that next nutrient trait that we're looking to involve in the crops that we are working on. This is the jewel when it comes to the work that all of us as plant breeders, I'm trained as a plant breeder 1,000 years ago. These gene banks are the kind of tools that really will be able to give us access to what it is that we will require for no matter what comes when it's required around resilience over the next, not only the decade, but the next century and even beyond. But of course, especially CG centers are very well known around breeding new crops. Of course, we follow in the steps of Dr. MS Swaminathan, we follow in the steps of Dr. Borlaug, thinking about how we can improve those crops. In the past, We've always thought a lot about just getting those new genetics and then we'll let someone else take care of things. We're now much more involved with national seed systems. We're thinking about how we make sure that those end users actually get access to the kinds of crops that are highlighted here, whether there are productive sorghum varieties in West Africa, whether there are high iron varieties that are being released across many of the partner governments where we work in collaboration with national research systems, regulatory systems, so that the genetics that are produced in ICRISAT, but in partnership with all of our colleagues, are actually released. And you just see some of the examples that are here. Professor, I hope you wouldn't mind, I will use a Nigerian example. Sometimes plant breeders do not know maybe what the next requirement will be around what our targets are. In the case of Nigeria, the security forces have asked that smaller or more dwarf crops will be grown. So ICRISAT has worked with the national system within Nigeria and a number of agricultural universities to produce what is essentially a dwarf sorghum that has been released because it just makes security and other aspects very more useful or more possible in some of those areas where there are other issues that are being addressed. So in the case of breeding, what is the future? Thinking about how we can move more rapidly, so we talk about things like speed breeding, where we can get multiple generations in a greenhouse to move things along. When I started as a plant breeder, I would grow one generation in Canada and we would grow one generation in New Zealand. So only 2 cycles in a year. Now we can do 6 or 7 cycles in a year. In the case of ICRISAT, we have something called a LESI scan, which takes a huge outdoor environment where we grow our plants of those next new cultivars or those new varieties that we hope for. We can take thousands of images of those plants. We can get a good understanding of how we link the genotype or the genetic basis of that crop to its phenotype, or how it actually appears, how it expresses that genetic component. Of course, we fly drones to be able to, again, get a good understanding of how these crops are developing, and of course, how we can select the newest, the most important varieties that are out there that can then be released. So all of these things, these are the future when it comes to accelerated crop improvement. This is the way that we are getting the kinds of progress that people have talked about. And in this particular area, because I enjoyed so many of the papers that I saw yesterday, there was this discussion of scale neutral. If you can capture insect resistance, higher nutrition into a seed, that seed will be expressing itself, and it will work for a farmer that has half a hectare or a farmer that has 1,000 hectares. So that is also in the back of our mind. So beyond the idea of crop breeding is around resilient farming systems. How are the next things that we are going to be able to do within those cropping systems, or maybe even those advanced agroecological systems? And I would just highlight a couple. We work within ICRISAT in a number of locations across India, especially in areas of Jhansi, in UP and others, where we're looking at how we can create new methods of enhancing water management, of being able to use things like farm ponds, to use traditional systems that have been in operation for centuries, where some of that expertise has been lost. And we're seeing all kinds of renewal there in new opportunities for increasing productivity in areas that before people were writing off. Many of the districts that are in the new 100 district program that was announced by the union government are in UP, and we certainly see opportunities to scale this kind of work that we're doing in Jhansi across a wide array of those dryland areas within India. And I guess the second component I would talk about as far as a future opportunity, but perhaps it's already here, is the idea of soil health. So in the past, soils, and I defer to many, as you know, Dr. Pathak, our DG, was a soil scientist. To be able to actually characterize soil, in the past we looked at maybe its physical characteristics, the clay and the silt and other sorts of things. Now we can get an actual fingerprint of all of the living organisms in that soil. And the benefit of that is that it starts to allow us to understand how we can create healthier soils by all kinds of either interventions or care that's being taken, management systems. So soil health is now, and certainly will become, a real focus to show that we're not only about productivity, but we're also about sustainability. And maybe the third thing that I would talk about is just these transforming agricultural or agri-food systems. In this particular area, where is the future? Of course, thinking about policy, thinking about trade, thinking about how all of these components come together. I would perhaps use the example here in India of midday meals. How does ICRISAT get involved in that? We provide our best performing varieties to farmers in areas that are involved in midday meal programs. They grow those crops, thank you very much, increase the crop, provide it to processing groups, usually led by women, that produce and process this food that then sell to schools through the government program around midday meals, so that everything fits together in that kind of a nice flow through. So certainly things around safer food and trade. We do a lot of work, policy work here with several of the groups. You've already seen and heard about the Pulse mission in India. You've heard about the oilseed mission. These are the kinds of things that ICRISAT is very involved with. And in addition to that, we're also thinking about these smart foods, the kinds of nutritional benefits that nutrition can provide. We've already told you, I've already told you about high iron materials, all of these other ways that we can increase productivity and make things far more not only nutritious, but nutrient dense for all of the communities that are accessing these kind of materials. So in conclusion, we've already heard a little bit about how this genomic revolution is leading towards new opportunities. I've told you a little bit about some of the tools that we are using. I've said that this is a future-forward talk, but the truth of the matter is that this work is already being done. We are doing this speed breeding work. It's the way that we've just released a heat-tolerant pigeon pea that can survive up to plus 45 degrees C. It means that in the case of India, pigeon pea yields will not only increase, but we'll be able to expand the area that pigeon pea can grow, even in off-season locations. We're now starting to use those tools, not only of just understanding the genetics, but using these tools to predict where the genomics are going. We don't have to grow everything out in the field. We don't even have to do the kind of scanning that I told you. We can start to predict based on data sets using, again, machine learning tools. And of course, we've already heard very much about the regulatory system in India, which allows us to do work in cases of gene editing. Say in the case where we know that there are issues with millet with respect to a number of its nutritional categories or downsides when it comes to some of its characteristics, things that we can actually modify to the benefit of end users. So what does the future hold? It's very much thinking about, of course, using technology, using innovation in a way that is accessible to all of those that can benefit, to make sure that we have these new techniques that are being handled in a responsible way, and of course, to produce materials that are both productive, but also sustainable over the future as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Blade. We had 4 rather full-time scientists speaking to us. Now it's a time for a scientist to speak, but someone who has enormous amount of interest and engagement with issues of political economy, of science and technology as well. Sometimes we invite him with the following preface. Let's have a strong, dark cup of coffee without milk, without sugar. Professor Jayaraman.
Thank you, FAS, for this opportunity to be part of this conference. I have contributed a little bit to the organizing of this in terms of its program, but it is also, I think, an occasion to acknowledge long-standing and very intellectually fruitful and stimulating collaboration. I am really, I must say that in this talk, I am more the marketing agent for extensive work done by my colleagues, Sandeep Mahato, Gautam Radhakrishnan and Charu Devshali. This is work that has stretched over a couple of years. There is also parallel work on carbon taxes and its implication for small farmers, which you can hear about in the afternoon. And there was another talk yesterday with the related issues. So having said that, so I had just recalling the occasion I had at the first conference of the FAS to present a paper on climate change and agriculture. It was essentially a review, though with some critical comments that were perhaps original in nature. We had started out, my colleagues and I, this was done with my colleague at that time, Dr. Kamal Murari. We had intended to present something of an update of that paper. But in doing so, we realized how much the world had changed, even in this short span of 11 to 12 years on the theme of climate and agriculture. So we responded. There were better techniques, there were more sophisticated work to be done, but there's also a sea change in the context and the global discourse on climate change and agriculture. So let me begin with that. How does that work?
The right button.
I am doing the right button. Can somebody help with the pointer? That's a techno glitch. So I think one of the real dramatic changes that has taken place in the consideration of climate change and agriculture is from being primarily considered the site of adaptation to climate change, agriculture is increasingly seen as the site of mitigation. And a lot of this has come from somewhat, shall I say, statistics that have not been upfront in the way it is presented, conflating, for instance, within farm gate emissions with supply chain emissions as well. So the farmer, so to speak, becomes part of what is called a food system or a supply chain. And the question of mitigation is something that seems to apply across all actors within this so-called system. This is the first challenge. The second is the redefinition or the attempted redefinition of the term climate resilience. Resilience understood normally in the context of adaptation. In the hands of the IPCC leadership of the second working group of the sixth assessment report, underwent something of a transformation. And now the claim is that resilience means that mitigation and adaptation are overlapping sort of tasks that one has to undertake at all scales. Unfortunately, this ignores who emitted, how much, who has the capacity to lead in managing the impacts, and it ends up putting the burden on those with minimal responsibility. The third is pushing aside the concept of vulnerability and replacing it with risk. In some sense, neutralizing the distributional consequences of climate change. While on the one hand, adaptation has suffered from lack of finance, its inability to take off, there has been an overemphasis in the literature, in the academic literature, on maladaptation. So you find far more perhaps on maladaptation than you do on adaptation. And unfortunately, redefining maladaptation as simply the absence of mitigation. So, to conflate again mitigation and adaptation. Major proponents, and more at an institutional level across the world, major proponents of technology growth in agriculture now seem willing to privilege sustainability over productivity. Of course, when challenged, nobody denies that productivity is necessary, but it is the emphasis and the discourse that you bring to the table in discussions that counts for what is really happening. This includes very surprising actors like the World Bank, the FAO, there's a number of organizations, all recent converts to what is broadly termed sometimes regenerative agriculture, but includes a variety of other approaches. Quite shockingly, and this is something which is currently only recently has come under discussion, all the IPCC mitigation scenarios for the future, projecting pathways of reaching net zero, were all pathways that would not even meet the SDG goals by 2050. Not a single scenario does that. And so the path to a net zero world in terms of emissions is a world with hunger, with a rising population at risk of hunger, and the non-satisfaction of basic needs. Much of this, and unfortunately this is partly true of the economics of Eat Lancet diets as well, though of course the solution, quote unquote, is that there will be post the model processing, the idea that there will be some kind of benefit transfers of some kind which will alleviate the issue. But then the problem is, why do we want scenarios to start with that do not satisfy basic minimum needs and then pretend that you would solve it by direct transfers? Much of the above is justified by the urgency of global warming. And so there is some idea of triage that works here, that the environmental question is so overridingly important that issues like hunger, malnutrition, modernity, or whatever has to take a back seat. Fortunately, it seems Bill Gates has realized there is something of an issue here. Unfortunately, on the one occasion, I am able to agree with Bill Gates. He seems to be receiving enormous flack in the global environmental media. The other, of course, in India, you have this, there is always the enthusiastic Indian version of global trends, and so the latest fascination, if you look at the business media, is carbon markets in agriculture. So my colleagues will speak about this in the afternoon, about carbon taxes in agriculture, but let me go on. But the broader issues and challenges remain. So the core issue for the global south is not just exposure to worsening hazard, but its distributional consequences. Impacts, vulnerability, and adaptive capacities are all deeply unequal. Our understanding of adaptation strategies at scale is limited. It overlooks the complex trade-offs between productivity, climate sensitivity, and equity under different global agricultural production conditions. An example of this, which I will touch upon briefly in just a minute, is, for instance, the interaction of irrigation with extreme temperatures. So what we need to understand more deeply is also the relationship between averages and extremes, which is, of course, known to experts in the subject. Its systematic disparities and inequalities make small and marginal farmers acutely vulnerable, which dictates their adaptive capacity, reducing access and the use of their use of common adaptation levers. Discerning this from the data is complicated. Good data on this is very hard to come by, so we have spent some considerable effort, led by Sandeep Mahato in particular, in trying to extract what we can out of existing secondary data sources. But the shift in agenda is unmistakable. The creeping withdrawal of the goal to develop the productivity, incomes, and adaptive capacity of small and marginal farmers, and replacing it with a mitigation-driven agenda. Considering food systems as the basis obfuscates structural issues, for instance, linked in variation in carbon footprint across farm size, crops, input supply chains, and geographical regions. So we'll show some work that we have done on this. And the other thing which I hope I'll have time to touch upon briefly is this whole idea of proposing carbon sequestration, or the pumping of the increase of soil organic carbon as a win-win strategy across the board without critical scrutiny. So I don't want to go too much into temperature impact on crop production. I'll just speak more specifically of some aspects. We must remember that while the overall production in India and productivity still does not show the effect of extreme heat, however, of increasing temperatures, however, extremes are beginning to have noticeable and prominent effects. And this is something we need to decipher. Existing autonomous changes by farmers are insufficient for meeting this accelerating heat, especially in extremes. However, there are large-scale production, projections for the future, where the dramatic decrease in yields, etc., are projected. A lot of this literature, assume very high warming scenarios, typically assume no additional adaptation, and tend to be alarming rather than realistic assessments. So one of the interesting studies that we did recently is to look at, for instance, what is the trade-off between irrigation and extreme heat. In general, irrigation is considered the panacea to increasing heat in crop production. But does it work all the time? And so what we found is in the case for wheat, irrigation raises yields per 8.7% per standard deviation increase in heat. However, the irrigation heat interaction is not significant, indicating that heat does not buffer heat sensitivity. For paddy, irrigation raises yields by 4.3%, but sustained heat shows a negative interaction with irrigation. So it's not as if irrigation is a guaranteed panacea to increasing heat. And beyond a point that it works in the other way, there is a negative effect. This is something which needs to be understood more carefully. And there is some evidence from the agronomy literature that this could be possible. This is just an illustration of the fact that there are no guaranteed rules under all circumstances for adaptation. And so the context, etc., are very important. To what extent are small farmers capable of, at this time, given the current situation, of accessing those services which will help promote their adaptive capacity? So this is not something which is easy to estimate. So we did this exercise of looking at grouping together results from the NSS surveys from the 59th round, the 70th, and the 77th, where you look at the access that farmers have to extension advice, to insurance, their reporting of loss, and the share of irrigation. So we are grouping studies which are not exactly comparable, but comparing small and large farmers. You see the continued deprivation and the vulnerability of small farmers and the lack of access they have to what are called levers of adaptation. So the issue with the food system approach is something that we were able to sort of probe a little further in the context of looking at the carbon footprint of agriculture. And this we looked at not only carbon footprint in terms of within farm gate, but also the carbon footprint associated with the electricity that is used in irrigation, and so on and so forth. Particularly from the upstream supply chain, fertilizer production and irrigation energy. So this illustrates very clearly that there are different drivers and different responsibilities depending on how you define what is the carbon footprint. Within farm gate, larger farms are more emission efficient per hectare due to obvious advantages of scale, and this we can demonstrate very clearly, while emission to yield relationships vary by crop. Within farm and upstream emissions are driven by fundamentally different factors. And these factors outside the farm gate are not in the farmer's control and also at the same time linked to their adaptive capacity. Aggregating these sources is inequitable and risks penalizing farmers for the structural vulnerabilities that adaptation is meant to address. So you can see here just a snapshot to show some of the, illustrate the calculations that underlie these statements. You'll find a far more detailed description in the paper. So one last 30 seconds, if the chair would allow, is the soil organic carbon productivity linkage. So, for this is the Indian version, if you wish, of motherhood and apple pie. This is, the earth as mother, so Dharti ki Chamta is a very potent slogan. So there is a remarkable upsurge of interest in soil health that transcends agricultural science and is now extremely popular even across the political spectrum. And especially in the world of civil society organizations, this is, everybody works on soil, enhancing soil organic carbon. So it is, however, something that needs to be done quite carefully. What is the impact of increasing soil organic carbon on yields, and what is the nature of this relationship? Okay? So this is some work which requires some sophisticated statistical techniques, which I will not get into. So what is the outcome? The outcome is that fertilizer intensity is the most important and consistent factor driving yield improvements across all crops. So the effect of soil organic carbon on yield is predominantly non-significant and statistically close to zero for most crops. So good management drives the sustained yields. The maintenance of soil organic carbon is a critical co-benefit of that management, and not the primary driver of productivity. I think this is well known in the scientific community, but it is this new drive for mitigation and the soil as the arena of mitigation that is driving this sort of excessive emphasis on soil organic carbon. So this is just by way of illustration. So by way of a very quick conclusion, adaptation is multi-layered and relational, including complex interaction between multiple factors. And it requires far deeper study than we seem to be devoting at this stage. Effective adaptation needs to move beyond universal approaches and prioritize equitable, context-specific interventions, all of which require more resources. Securing livelihoods and reducing their climate risk is the central goal. Adaptation needs to be the non-negotiable priority for climate-resilient agriculture, not an objective to be traded off against mitigation. And if it is a world of net zero in terms of carbon that we seek, the idea that somehow we can reach this without reaching zero in hunger and malnutrition would be both an undesirable world and a world which cannot, will not be sustainable. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you for that really hot, dark cup of coffee without milk, without sugar. Just as a reward for ending this meeting on time as a strict chair, I'm going to take 2 or 3 minutes to finish something that I started off saying in the beginning of the session. And I largely want to focus on something that I sort of finished from. This is the task that remains in some sense in Indian agriculture. A lot of you are social scientists here, and this session has been largely on science, and hence there is a relationship between science and social scientists, that conversation that must take place. And this is one of the ways in which we need to create or understand or engage with that link. There's enormous yield gap in Indian agriculture today. In many crops, the yields can actually be doubled or even tripled to reach any standard that you would like to keep for yourself, whether it's with a state with the highest yield within India, the global average yield, or the world's highest yield. There is a lot of distance to travel for Indian agriculture. A lot of people think about millets as a very important solution. Why has the millet, so-called millet focus, not succeeded? I think the answer lies in this particular graph. The absence of scientific or technological breakthrough in millet technology, except 1 or 2 crops like pearl millet or sometimes finger millet, you have very low productivity in a range of millets that we have, and compare it with the high yields that we have for rice, wheat, or even maize, it creates a clear malalignment in terms of the economics of cultivation. There is a certain point to be raised with respect to the economic policy and the agricultural research policy, often understated. And I would just say this, I would just mention this number in front of you. This is the share of India's agricultural GVO, GDP, that is invested in public agricultural research. In developed capitalist countries, this number is somewhere between 2 and 3%. In a country like Brazil, it's somewhere around 1.4%. The average for developing countries is 0.6%, but India is somewhere around 0.5 to 0.6% of agricultural GVO invested in public agricultural research. This is utterly insufficient given the challenge that we have. Most agricultural university or agricultural research institutions do not appoint researchers, have not appointed researchers for an extended period of time. They appoint people on contract. They love to call them YPs, young professionals, who are very underpaid, who work on contracts when they are expected to do the work that scientists are supposed to do. This is not the way to achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves. Professor Ramachandran, I'll take 2 minutes, I'll close. So this is another story that is very important. Then the other point that I wanted to make is the one related to chemical inputs. And this is in the discussion that we have had, in the discussion that we have had on climate change, on the importance of sustainability and so on, there is this problematization of the use of chemicals. The reduction of the use of chemicals is essential to become net zero, and there is a huge problem of chemophobia, that I would call it, that exists in our society. There is a very large project of the ICAR that looks at this, and that essentially tells you that among the 16,370 samples they looked at in 6 months between January and July of 2024, they found only 2.6% of the samples exceeding the Food Safety Authority of India's MRL, maximum residue limit. This maximum residue limit is an extraordinarily lower value compared to the minimum that will cause a health impact in us, in a human being. It's something that we can be absolutely safe about. And only 2.6% of the samples are found to exceed the MRL. But the problem lies in the second sentence, which is that in 26.5% of the samples, the pesticides that were used or chemical residues that were found were off-label. In other words, not recommended for that particular crop. So this is a problem with our complete dismantling of the public extension system that we have had in our country. The extension system getting dismantled has meant that farmers receive advice on chemicals from all kinds of spurious sources, including private input dealers who have a vested interest in increasing their sales, of course. And that has completely created this kind of a problem. And so the problem has to be appropriately located, in my view. The last point that I wanted to make, I had to add something else to say, but because this is a gathering of social scientists and scientists, I present this graph among scientists, I get a particular feedback. I present this picture in a gathering of social scientists, I get quite a different response. I think both are coming from their own sides. And I think FAS is probably the only organization that brings together social scientists and agricultural scientists in one platform. And that conversation simply does not happen. This is something that I've tried to say in platforms, Professor Bansal, of the NAS as well, that this conversation is not taking place. And this lack of this conversation is leading to enormous amount of misunderstandings, enormous amount of lack of understandings. For example, there is the immediate response that you get when you speak about the GM technology or a gene editing technology in a social science platform is one of immediate skepticism. Not even trying to understand the technology, because many people do not understand the technology. Reverse is the case from the scientist side, where the concerns of social scientists are inadequately appreciated in the potential of a technology to create change. So I'm not talking about a middle path, but understanding each other is extremely important in this conversation. But the key point about this plenary, the takeaway from this plenary, in my view, should be this. Thank you very much.